Morning in Los Gatos, California, began with the forest slowly waking up. Mist drifted through the crisp air, and eucalyptus trees stretched lazily on the slopes of the hills. David Brooks, a 35-year-old wildlife veterinarian, tossed a water bottle, a first aid kit, and a pair of gloves into his backpack. Though he volunteered at a local wildlife rescue, today's call was different. A koala, in California. It sounded absurd, until he saw the photo. The animal looked dirty, scared, curled up against a wooden fence. The picture was sent by a teenager named Zach, who lived in a trailer on the edge of town with his mother. "He's been here since morning," the text read. David jumped into his pickup and drove straight to the address. He was met by a worried woman and a lanky teenage boy, around 15. Zach held a cup of water in his hands, his eyes locked on the animal. "He won't leave. He's breathing really hard," the boy said softly. The koala was huddled under a tree, a mess of gray-white fur, clearly dehydrated and dazed. David knelt slowly, speaking gently. "He's alive," he murmured. "But not for long if we don't act fast." He carefully wrapped the animal in a flannel blanket while Zach held a flashlight steady. Inside the truck, the koala whimpered faintly, but had stopped shaking. Zach climbed in next to him. "Can I come with you?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. David looked at him and nodded. "Yeah, I think you should." Something about this meeting felt important, and the little creature didn't seem like just any animal. The clinic was a small, one-story building tucked between the hills and the highway, with a faded wooden sign reading Wild Care Center. David had helped build it with his own hands years ago, and now it was about to face one of its strangest cases. Yet, inside, the air was cool and sterile. He placed the koala gently on the exam table while Zach stood near the door, wide-eyed and silent. "Zach, can you hand me that towel?" David asked without turning. The boy moved quickly, handing over a clean cloth as David began examining the animal's limbs, eyes, and fur. "Male," he noted aloud. "Probably 2 or 3 years old. No microchip. And this can't be right." David leaned closer, brushing back the fur near the animal's side where he spotted something unusual. A small stitched scar, almost surgical. "You've been someone's science project," he muttered. "But who? And how'd you end up here?" Zach stepped forward. "Do you think someone brought him from Australia?" "Maybe," David replied, eyes narrowed. "But transporting a koala illegally across the world isn't just hard, it's a federal crime. Someone wanted to hide him. Maybe he escaped." The koala let out a faint grunt, blinking slowly. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and placed a paw on David's hand. Zach's voice broke the silence. "I think he trusts you." David looked at the boy, and then back at the koala. Something about the way those dark eyes held his gaze made the hairs on his neck stand up. This animal had seen things, terrible things, and someone might be looking for him. That night, David stayed late at the clinic. He had given the koala fluids, a mild sedative, and settled him into a heated enclosure with soft blankets and a branch for comfort. Zach refused to leave, sitting beside the glass, quietly watching the animal sleep. "What are you going to do with him?" Zach asked eventually, his voice barely above a whisper. David leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "First, I'm going to figure out how he got here. Then, maybe find a sanctuary or, if we can get clearance, return him home." Zach looked down. "What if he doesn't have a home?" David paused. That thought had crossed his mind too. The scar, the behavior, it all hinted at captivity, maybe worse. Just as he was about to answer, his phone buzzed. A restricted number. He stepped outside to take the call. "Brooks." Silence at first. Then a low, distorted voice crackled through. "You found it. Good. Stay out of it." Click. David stood motionless, the cold night wind biting at his skin. His instincts screamed danger. Whoever this was, they knew the koala was here, and they weren't happy about it. Back inside, Zach was still by the enclosure, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the heat lamp. "We might be in some trouble," David said carefully. Zach turned to him, unfazed. "Then I'll stay and help." David gave a half smile. "You're just a kid." "Yeah," Zach said. "But so is he." They both looked at the sleeping koala, and in that moment, an unspoken pact was formed. No matter what came next, they weren't letting him go without answers. By morning, the fog had lifted from the hills, but the weight of the phone call still clung to David like damp clothes. He sat at the desk, reviewing the koala's x-rays and lab results, looking for anything that might give him a clue. Zach brewed coffee in the corner, too mature for his age, too calm for everything going on. He'd barely slept. "Look at this," David said, pointing to the screen. "There's a small piece of metal lodged behind his shoulder blade. Not a tracker, too crude. Maybe a fragment from something, but we need to remove it." "You can do it?" Zach asked. "Yeah, I've done worse." David paused. "But I'll need help keeping him calm." "I'll be there," the boy said without hesitation. They prepped the small surgical room. David cleaned the tools with practiced ease, while Zach stood by, watching every move. The koala, now nicknamed Ollie by Zach, was placed gently on the table under light anesthesia. The operation was delicate. The metal was embedded deeper than expected. Sweat dripped down David's temple as he worked carefully, avoiding the nerves. Finally, he held it up. An odd, jagged piece, dark and smooth, almost like obsidian. Definitely not something from the wild. He dropped it into a metal tray with a clang. "That's no accident," he muttered. Suddenly, headlights flashed through the clinic windows. A car, idling. David and Zach froze. The driver didn't get out. The vehicle just sat there, engine humming like a warning. After a minute, it pulled away, tires crunching gravel. David looked at Zach. Someone's watching. That night, David double-locked the clinic doors and covered the front windows with blankets. He installed a motion sensor near the rear entrance and checked the security cameras twice. Whatever was going on, it was no longer just about wildlife care. It was turning into something far more dangerous. Zach refused to leave, and David didn't argue. The boy had a quiet resolve in his eyes that reminded David of himself at that age. Alone, but holding on to something that mattered. They slept in shifts. At 3 a.m., David sat by the enclosure, watching Ollie stir in his sleep, the bandage along his side rising and falling with each breath. Suddenly, a faint clink echoed from outside. David stood, heart pounding. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out back. The alley behind the clinic was empty, except for a single manila envelope placed neatly on the doorstep. No one in sight. Inside, Zach looked up as David returned with the envelope. He tore it open and pulled out a stack of glossy photographs. Each photo showed Ollie, inside a cage, strapped to a gurney, sedated. Needles, monitors, a sterile lab with no windows. Government logos blurred in the corners. "What the hell?" David whispered. Then came the note. Typed. Simple. Terrifying. "Property of the United Defense Research Initiative. Subject must be returned. This is your only warning." Zach read it over David's shoulder, silent for a long moment. Then he said, "They're not getting him back." David met his gaze. "No, they're not." And just like that, a plan began forming. By sunrise, David and Zach had made their decision. They couldn't stay at the clinic. Whoever was after Ollie knew exactly where he was, and they wouldn't wait forever. David packed supplies, syringes, bandages, tranquilizers, Ollie's food, Zach's backpack. They loaded the pickup truck quietly. Ollie, still groggy but stable, was secured in a padded crate in the back seat. "Where are we going?" Zach asked. "A cabin in Mendocino," David said. "Off-grid. Belongs to an old friend who owes me one." They left before the first light hit the windows. The drive north was quiet. Forests thickened, traffic thinned, and with every mile, the tension in David's chest loosened a little. Zach sat beside him, watching the trees blur by, one hand resting on the crate. "You ever run from something before?" he asked. David hesitated. "Once, but I learned something." "What?" "Sometimes running is the only way to stand your ground." They arrived at the cabin by dusk. It was small and weathered, but safe. Tucked deep into the woods, with a solar panel and a water tank out back, it was perfect. Inside, David built a fire. Ollie was placed near it, his breathing calm, his eyes clearer than ever. That night, Zach sat on the floor beside the crate, humming softly. David watched him, realizing how much the boy had changed in just a few days. Braver, stronger. "We'll figure this out," David said. Zach nodded. "We have to." Outside, the forest whispered with wind and branches. But for the first time in days, no one was watching. For 2 days, they lived in near silence. The cabin was quiet, the signal non-existent, and the world felt far away. Ollie grew stronger. He began eating eucalyptus leaves again, moving around the small enclosure, even letting Zach pet him gently. David, meanwhile, studied the strange metal shard they'd removed. He sent a photo of it to an old colleague at UC Davis under a fake name. The reply was quick and unsettling. "This is lab-grade experimental alloy, not commercially available. Definitely military." That evening, as David stepped out to chop wood, he noticed tire tracks, fresh ones, deep in the dirt road. He hadn't heard an engine, but someone had been close, watching. He rushed inside. "Pack everything, now!" Zach didn't ask questions. He scooped up Ollie's crate as David killed the lights and pulled a tarp over the windows. But they were too late. A black SUV appeared on the ridge above the cabin. Then another. Headlights cut through the forest gloom. Armed figures stepped out, wearing black tactical gear. David's breath caught. How did they find us so fast? He grabbed Zach by the arm and pulled him toward the back exit. "We're going to the creek. There's a ravine about a quarter-mile in. We'll lose them there." They ran, leaves crunching beneath their feet, Ollie's crate swinging between them. Gunmetal voices shouted behind them. Orders barked through radios. Zach stumbled once, but David yanked him up. "I won't leave him," the boy gasped. "I won't either," David growled. They reached the edge of the ravine, where cold mist rose from below. David scanned for a path. There was only one choice. Jump. He looked at Zach. "Hold on to me." Together, they leapt into the darkness. They landed hard in the ravine. David shielded Zach and the crate as they tumbled into the underbrush. Pain shot through his arm, but he didn't stop. He forced himself up, dragging the crate as Zach limped beside him. The creek at the bottom carved a path through jagged rocks. They followed it, feet soaked, breath ragged, until headlights no longer pierced the trees. But their escape had a cost. David's shoulder hung limp, dislocated, maybe worse. Blood dripped from a cut above his eyebrow. He leaned against a boulder, teeth clenched. "We can't stop," Zach whispered. David smiled through pain. "You're a tough kid." In the early light, they reached an old ranger station, abandoned but still standing. There they hid. Hours passed before a helicopter buzzed overhead, scanning, then faded west. David knew they wouldn't stop. Not until they found him. Not until they had Ollie back. So he made a decision. That night, as Zach slept beside Ollie, David used the old station's satellite radio. He made one call, to a wildlife journalist he'd once treated an injured fox with. He told the full story. The illegal transport, the military lab, the scar, the pursuit, the photographs. Then he attached everything he had, and disappeared the next day. By the time federal agents reached the cabin, the media storm had already begun. News channels aired the images. Protesters surrounded the lab. Public outrage exploded. David and Zach were gone. But Ollie was flown, legally this time, to a wildlife sanctuary in New South Wales, Australia. Cameras flashed as he stepped onto the soil of his homeland. Zach watched from a hidden hill nearby. A tear rolled down his cheek, but he smiled. "Welcome home, buddy," he whispered. Somewhere far off, David watched too. And for once, justice had found its way.